Welcome to the Connected Ministry Series. I'm Brad Hill. I'll be your host for today. And today's episode is brought to you by Glue. Glue's the platform that releases the collective might of the faith community. If you are looking for more ways to connect new people into your church, Glue's Explorer Connection program can help. Go to glue.us/reach to learn more. While most of our episodes will be recorded virtually, in today's episode, I had a really rare opportunity to sit down with Henry Cloud in person, and we talked about a really important topic for all church leaders: trust. So pastors and church leaders, what became clear during our time together is that Henry has such a heart to speak to every one of you directly and encourage you in the work that you're doing. And there's a couple things that stood out to me in our conversation. If you don't know much about Henry Cloud, what you need to know is that he's been around the church for a long time. And he understands, in many ways, the role of a pastor, the struggles and the unique challenges that we go through in church leadership. So as it relates to trust, Henry took time to talk about how trust gets built inside the church. You're going to want to hear that. And also what to do when it gets broken. And then we went outside the four walls also and really touched on how do you build trust with people that you're just beginning to reach or you have not yet reached. And really important point, Henry offered up the number one factor to building trust. So I want you to listen for that because it's a really important point for all of us leaders to hear. So I hope this episode is an encouragement to you. Be encouraged by what Henry shared. And now I hope you enjoy the episode. Let's dive in. Well, thanks so much for being here today to talk about this subject. And I wanted to start, we're seeing with a lot of our churches right now, several indicators or even bellwethers of more like disconnection, whether it's with their people, with their communities, even with other churches.
Yeah.
What would you say is a relationship between connection and trust? What's the bridge between those two?
Well, it's almost like they're the same thing, because as soon as someone begins to trust you, you have connected at some level. But to build connection in the deeper ways that you need to build it, you're going to have trust fuel that, because trust, literally, I mean, we look at the neuroscience, the way that God designed our brains, our bodies, all the way down your spinal column and in your gut. The human being is 24/7 around the clock, asking in every cell of their body, asking one question all the time before anything else: am I safe? I mean, we've been sitting here breathing for a while, but you're not focused on it because your system has already determined the air is safe to breathe. So you're just breathing, you're taking it in. And so that works. But if you smelled a fume, a gas fume or something, before your consciousness would even know it, to get to what's that moment, your system would have detected something and started to either hit pause or move away. And so we were talking about like churches, for example. You know, churches have the great need to connect with people who have needs that the church can fulfill. But a lot of times what happens is we're trying to, market that or promote it, or we have this for you, or this, that, and the other. But for somebody to connect and actually take a step towards, they have to trust. And the way you build trust, I mean, there's several factors involved, but it starts with their feeling like, this is something I want to move towards. Even to listen for one more minute to something online, or after listening, to take a step to engage. That's all going to be built on the dynamics of how much they are feeling like they trust what's being said to them.
So I want to build on that. That's an interesting point. A lot of the research that we've been working on with people's attitudes right now in our culture toward the church, toward Christians, we've got some work to do. And even comparing now to maybe a generation ago.
Well, even to 5 years ago.
5 years, yeah, pre-COVID.
This is an unprecedented moment in the breakdown of trust. And, you talk about we either move towards, engage, embrace, invest, or we hit pause, or worse, we move away. And right now, there are so many dynamics that everybody kind of wakes up in the morning on pause. And even go further in moving away, disconnecting from churches or organizations or family members that they were previously connected to. So you've got a big issue right now. I mean, it's obviously always been an issue, but the context now, and as I talk to pastors, it's just huge to try to engage people.
What do you see though as how did we get here with respect to the church? And when we poll across America, the trust levels in the idea of the local church as an institution are probably at about an all-time low.
Yeah.
What do you think kind of got us here?
It is there's so many factors. You really, this is why you go back to connection. If you talk to people, and I live in a predominantly, non-Christian area, and have, so many unchurched, non-church, non-believing friends. But when I talk to them about faith, and you start to pull out why they don't trust church or even faith, or organized religion is one you hear a lot about. There's not one reason. I talked to one of them, and it may be, yeah, well, my uncle was a pastor, and I know what those guys are about. It may be an individual experience. It may be that they have a loony family member that's in their face, all the time in some crazy way. It may be on either side of the aisle that the people they know that are connected to faith so like are opposite of what they are into and stand for, and it could be in a variety of topics, that's turned them off. And then you got the whole institutional part of it. We've obviously seen, big, big things in the news. And so they look at that and go, oh, yeah, well, I knew it, and that's kind of how they see it. And oftentimes, sadly, this is the one maybe that breaks my heart the most, because when I talk to people, the old saying when I was a kid, there's no atheist in a foxhole, right, at war. Well, everybody's got a foxhole at some time in life. And you don't have to, I work with CEOs who are in, high-level performers that everybody thinks is above it all. But you get in a trusting conversation with them for very long, and you're going to find their foxhole. Because they'll start talking about their own pain or their own experience. And the one that breaks my heart the most is when there are people like that have reached out of the foxhole, and yet the response they got from someone of faith or a church did not understand them. And the answers they gave were either, it might have been great answers, but giving answers before you understand, the Bible says, is a folly and a shame. And they haven't connected with them. And they haven't listened first. So that person then, well, I try church, and they walk away. And that is a moment lost. I mean, you guys are trying to get people to take that first step to try to even click on something to see. I wonder if he gets me. They say he gets me. Does he get me? And if that moment connects with them, but then that next moment of when they try to connect with either someone of faith or their cousin or Aunt Susie or whoever it is, or they contact the local church, if that initial moment is not one that is able to transform either I'm on pause or I'm moving away, then we've lost it.
Right. Yeah, we we would sometimes say, hey, if we're out there with a message of Jesus that's very winsome, and then they come into our churches, do they see the same Jesus that they encountered in a media message?
Can I say something
Yeah.
about that? I talk to my non-believing friends, and they'll just go down the list. Well, all the judgmentalism and the hypocrisy, and I went to church and, something bad happened, and, there's, Christianity is just so exclusive, this one way thing, and so they have all these reasons, and but the big one is that I hear is they're so judgmental, and then they'll list these things, and I'll say, well, tell me, what you're into, and they'll start talking about how they want to see life. It should be compassionate and receiving and care about the poor and the oppressed and all these kind of things. And one of my favorite things is, you know what? You're a Jesus follower and you don't know it, because everything you hate, he hated. The only people he screamed at and got mad at were the religious leaders for doing all the things that you just listed. And and what I want you to know is that what you're thinking the faith is and the church is exactly what he came to say. This stuff is not what it's about. Look at me. This is what it's about. And so I would ask you, so what is it about compassion and serving others and taking your talents and building them and reaching out to people in need and helping them get to a better place and having a fuller life? Now, which of those do you disagree with? Because the view they have, a lot of times that first step, it'll confirm that in some way.
Right.
Or if it doesn't confirm it, it doesn't surprise them that this person from the church is like that Jesus that you said gets me. Well, if whoever reaches out to me gets me, now you started a cognitive dissonance, and that's a door, and that's a different kind of pause. It's a pause that is, do I maybe want this, versus a pause of, wait a minute, that didn't feel good.
So I want to stay on the outside the four walls for a minute, and then I want to maybe go inside the church a little bit more with trust and connection. We are seeing a glue every day, hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of people open themselves up on a screen. They'll click on something and they'll type in more in a little chat window than typically somebody would tell you in a church lobby on Sunday.
And if I can say one thing about that, another thing we don't realize is that now, it used to be, well, I'm going to go to a lobby or a building or a doctor's office or whatever. Now, for a lot of people, when they click on a screen, that is the lobby. It is a doctor's office. That is life now.
It is. And this is, I'm curious to have you just opine on this dynamic where for some reason it seems like people may be more willing at times to trust an anonymous website.
Oh, for sure.
Something they type in, pour their guts out, where they wouldn't do that in person. Why do you think that is? Because I think pastors need to understand that you actually, in many ways, entering into a conversation with one of these anonymous explorers are going to know more about that person online than you would have maybe in an analog interaction.
Well, we would all rather talk through our fig leaf than pull off the fig leaf, because you can take all the psychology in the world and almost like start there. There's the true self and the false self, right? And Paul even addresses this in Ephesians: take off falsehood, speak truth. But the deepest truths about people's lives are truths that by definition are the most vulnerable, because they have to do with their needs and their fears and their pains and their conflicts and their weaknesses and their inabilities. So those are the most vulnerable. So the most vulnerable parts of us, de facto, are the most protected parts. And so when Genesis 3 says, as soon as we fell into that state, we covered ourselves, right? And that's the covering you're talking about. So what an anonymous contact does is, it's like a suicide hotline. People will make that call a lot of times before they'll go into a shrink's office. And that first contact online is somebody looking through the fig leaf.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really, really important moment. The other thing is, though, as much as we know that, you can do great things on Zoom and you can do great things online, it still cannot fully accomplish what an incarnational experience with another human can do. I mean, the way God has wired the brain. I mean, we have an incarnational gospel. I mean, he could have had us click on heaven and we got downloaded the stuff. But what he did was he came down here. And First John says he dwelt among us. The experience of looking into someone's eyes when they peep through that fig leaf and let you know a little bit, what that experience does is it actually, if done well, it opens up the whole system to where they reveal more. So you're in a little bit of an incredible opportunity and a paradox. The anonymous thing gives a first peek to open up to invite and maybe take a deeper step of actually showing up or meeting with someone where the full range of how God wired the human spirit to be drawn out can engage. So you just, in today's world, you got to start online because that's where people are and that's where they feel safest. But when you start online, you got to do it in a way where they're not going to shut down. That's why I love the title, He Gets Us. Well, that is sort of like a synonym for one of the big factors, the book I wrote on trust. It's basically an algorithm of all the buttons that have to be pushed inside of somebody or all of us before we take a step forward or open up. And the very first one, God created mirror neurons. Throughout your whole system, a baby begins to draw life from outside of itself because someone looks in their eyes and sees their distress and begins to have a tone and a moving towards and respond in a way that opens up that system to trust and begin to take life in. And if they get harshness, look at the research on it. Babies in tones. They don't hear words, they hear tones. So the tone of the things that we're talking about are huge.
Yeah, when I grew up with church, it was often, hey, come belong, come join, and then we'll get to know you. Come and then you'll be known. And it feels like there's almost been an inversion of that where I don't know if I trust coming yet. I want to stay behind the fig leaf. Maybe I want to spend some time being known to build trust so I can come. How should a pastor think about that?
I read a book about that. This guy named Moses kind of sent out a message from top of the hill, and, and then this guy named Jesus said, well, he kind of left the hill and came down, and he left the temple, and he went and hung out with the hookers and the tax gatherers at the parties, and
Yep.
he wasn't telling them to come in. And big reason they wouldn't go in is because there are people over here saying, can't believe you hang out with those people. So you're right. The come join us message is fantastic for people who are ready and willing and able to come forward. But what he did was he went to them. And I love the verse where he says, I came to seek and to save that which was lost. Seek is not sitting here going, come. When you go seek something, you leave where you are and you go to where it is. And save, the word for save in the Greek, it means to heal. So I came to look for and heal, make whole that which was lost. Well, lost didn't mean God can't find us. Where are the humans? Oh, I think I put them over by the keys.
Right.
Lost means literally broken beyond repair and ready to be discarded. And so we got to go look for and be able to have something that is restorative for people that have fully disconnected. It's a different direction, but it's not new. But that roadway used to be a lot smoother to get to the church,
Yes.
and now it's a little rockier, and it may have a detour sign on it.
I want to spend a minute on pastors specifically. There's a lot that's been said recently about,
Can I say something?
yeah,
When I talk to pastors, I literally, um, I just feel like I'm standing on holy ground. You've, um, you've given up so much that you could have had and done because you have incredible talents and brains and all of that, and you have given it up, and people don't realize what you do, the extent of what it means to have to preach and be a social worker and a financial counselor and an ambulance and a judge and keep the lights on. And so you're angels.
that encouragement is going to mean a lot to many. It's been a hard few years, especially.
Brutal.
What are, Barna cites a stat that as many as 38 to 40% of pastors have considered leaving, not just their church, but leaving ministry in the last year.
Yeah. In fact, we did a webinar for pastors called "Don't Quit, We Need You," and it really got into the issues of why this is happening. And there's so many things of the ministry itself that actually annihilate human flourishing, and the way that the ministry gets structured, and the way that pastors are not um, literally taken care of. I mean, if you take our special forces, I mean, we have teams that are dedicated, that all they do is to develop and make those guys as strong and as whole and as ready as they can. And they have backups and they have all this stuff. I did a about 5-year research project with pastors and asked a few questions. And one of them was, where do you go that is 100% totally confidential, where you can be 100% transparent about what you're struggling with in your leadership or your personal life, and what's hard and where you hurt and all of that? 80% of pastors said, I don't have anywhere like that. The people they open up to are usually stakeholders in some way. They either go to the church, or they're maybe elders or donors or whoever, but they don't have a place where somebody's own agenda depends on how you're doing, right? Which is the definition of a dual relationship, and that's not how you help people, in certain ways. And the second question I asked was, what relationship do you have that is 100% dedicated to helping you in your leadership? I'm talking about one way. Like I do that professionally. People hire me. I'm not there for me. I'm not there to have a mutual, you help me, I'll help you. Every time I show up, it's 100% for you, focused on helping you as a leader. 80% of them said, I don't have anybody like that. The Army or Navy would never send somebody to war like that. They have dedicated people that are there to build them and to heal them. Third question, how many of you in the last year have experienced something that you would determine has gotten to clinical proportions? Either burnout or loss of energy or depression or anxiety or a habit pattern or something. And now sometime in the last year, you would say, this is a real issue. 80%? I don't know what bugs me more than this is I go into companies called in by boards, even when nothing's wrong. We want our CEO to have a coach where he or she can go, and you're there to help them. Okay. And then not only that, CEOs call me and say, we want to build our people and we want to strengthen them. We want to help them thrive. And businesses, I've got one client spends $100 million a year on coaching just for their leaders.
Wow. Church can learn a lot from that
Exactly.
model. Yeah.
How many churches have a budget line item for the building, health, restoration, and development of the pastor? Nobody else does it like that. In other words, everybody else has that, and the church oftentimes is not. And worse than that, the pastor's like, one of those little juicy boxy cups that, you have your kids with the straw. Well, the pastor's the juice with 1,000 straws, sucking life out of them all the time. It's a tough deal.
So next to last question. It's interesting you mentioned 80% because that's also the number normally called Pareto's principle, right? The 80-20 rule. In most churches, about 80% of people are not volunteering, are not really contributing. There's resource out there, whether it's in the pews or even churches can partner with other organizations. My question is really this back to trust. What role do we think trust has in that 80%, whatever the number is, of people that are kind of sitting on the sidelines?
Yeah.
And if the pastor is able to deepen that trust, does it do good things to take some of those straws out of the sippy cup, so to speak, and get more people participating?
Yeah. Well, first of all, what percentage is that problem? Well, I think it's 100% because that's the same problem God has. And if you look at the parable of soils, there's one that, sort of like, somebody invited them to church, it bounced off the rocky ground. And then the second one, they come in and go, oh, yeah, this is great. But when? Christmas and Easter, and then they got stuff and they fall away, right? The third soil, to me, that's the one where the hard work gets to be done. Now, obviously, in the first two, you got later chances and all that. But the third soil says that they are so distracted that distracted by the riches and pleasures and worries of this life, that it chokes their fruitfulness and they never become fruitful. And then the fourth soil, that's the 20% you're talking about. And there is I guess what I'm trying to say, empathically to pastors, just because a lot of people, he did say, wide is the gate that leads to destruction, and many are going that way. And he said, narrow is the gate, and there are few that find it. So don't be discouraged that you do have a disparity in buy-in, but do be optimistic about that 20%. First of all, do be optimistic about, especially that third soil and these others. That's the whole mission, is to try to get them over there. And Jesus kept speaking to them all the time in warnings and in invitations and in serving them and all that. And you see a lot of them get moved. So don't be discouraged, but there's an opportunity in there as well.
So to end kind of where we started with trust and connection, kind of a hopeful tone, I guess. When we envision what it could be, when we envision where a church could be connecting to its own congregation, connecting to the community outside, getting its people connected to each other. Yeah. What's a vision for that? Like, what would be true, kind of a hopeful tone of where we could get to if this was done healthy?
Well, my hopeful tone, because I've seen it, but I wish it were done more, is it doesn't all rest on the pastor. It's the 20% that are going out and doing everything. You're preaching to a body. If you're the leader of the body, Ephesians 4 says the body heals itself and grows into maturity as each part does its work. So I think a big part to the answer to your question is, how do we develop strategies that make it easy to begin, accessible, simple, can invite the person in the cubicle next to them to church because we got something cool going on. I mean, that's where I think the great gains are made, and where the Christians are equipped to understand this thing of trust. You know, I think that if the 20% were really understanding the dynamics of how humans move towards something, they would give up about half of what they're saying, you know, to begin with. And then they would work on 2 Peter 1. It's incredible. It says you want to be fruitful, add to your faith these things. It starts with, you know, moral excellence. So, you know, if you're trying to reach somebody at work and everybody knows you're lying, cheating, and stealing, they can't believe you. That's foundational. But then it goes past that to knowledge. Are we equipping people with knowing kind of how to do this? And then it goes to perseverance. Are we teaching them? Yeah, you know, Jesus said, go and pray for people to be healed. Well, you study the people that do this very well and see people healed all over the world. They'll tell you, yeah, I prayed for 93 people before one got healed. And so perseverance is a big part of this. Go invite 93 people to church and 94 comes. I mean, that's about people getting married anyway. You date a lot of people first, right? But there's a perseverance that and normalize that. And then it goes, but I love where it ends up. It's this mutual affection and kindness and brotherly love. It's really hard to turn somebody off in the neighborhoods. We're equipping the 20% to go do the work. It's really hard to get people to not like you because you went and offered to mow their grass when their family was going through a crisis, or, you know, they got a newborn and say, let us make your meals for a week. Or, I mean, you know, there's 80,000 ways to do this, but it's not by just proclamation.
That's great. Well, trust is such a key component in relationships. God's wired us for it. So appreciate you coming today and sharing some insight.
Well,
it's been great.
I'm all for the mission. You know, when I talk to my unbelieving friends or friends that got disconnected from church, so many of the times you see a path back or a path to for the first time is because they feel like somebody gets me.
Right.
Somebody gets me, and then they find out it was, you know.
Amen. Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Good to be here.